The Baggies Podcast, giving you the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Hello Baggies fans and welcome to the Baggies Podcast here on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Yeah, afraid it's another difficult listen. I know they're getting boring. I'm getting bored doing them, trust me. I want to report some good news, but there isn't any this week, I'm afraid. But on this week's show, we're going to be talking about the Spurs game, looking ahead to the Manchester United game. We also, earlier in the week, I spoke to Nick Miller from The Athletic, who has recently sort of been the brains behind The Athletic's new Beyond the Headline series of podcasts, which is all about the making of Big Sam Allardyce. Yeah, you might not like him, but this gives you a bit of it. My interview with him gives a bit of an insight into what sort of a person he is, why he's implementing the tactics and methods that he is. And we're also going to be, I asked him at the end, will Sam Allardyce resign from West Brom if things get too bad? And Nick gave me an answer, so you'll be able to hear that towards the end of the episode. So thank you very much to Nick for coming on. We're going to be talking to him. You're going to be able to see that interview. And we also give your thoughts on what's been going on at the club. Put your few polls on Twitter earlier today. See what you guys think. But yeah, let's see what you guys have to say about the goings on at the club. However, if you're new around here, if you're on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, just go and do a subscribe, a follow, a subscribe, whatever. It would help to cheer me up, definitely, and probably help to cheer you up if you get to listen to somebody sharing the same pain as you are. But make sure you're following on Twitter as well, at the Baggies Pod or at LouisBent_. You can follow me on either of those. Their links are in the description on YouTube or Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you're listening from. You're all welcome. But let's get into this episode. It's episode 31 of the Baggies Podcast. However, if you haven't listened to last week's, I'd strongly recommend you do, even if you don't listen to the whole of it. Maybe go and listen to the bit about Marc-Antoine Fortuna, where I interviewed him and talked to him about his time at the Albion. Might be one that you want to listen to. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. Yeah, it's time to dive straight into the Tottenham game and talk about what's been happening on the pitch earlier today. Well, we played Tottenham at the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for the first time, our first visit there, and we lost. Yeah, big surprise. It's becoming a real surprise losing every week. But we lost to Tottenham 2-0. And we'll start with the lineup, I think, is where we need to go for, because in reality, the lineup wasn't great. It wasn't in any way anywhere near the best team Allardyce could have picked. But yeah, let's talk through that. So, you go into this game, you've got, I suppose, if you string a few results together, you might be within a chance of staying up. But if you start picking lineups like this, you're probably going to end up nowhere near it. So you start with Johnston in goal, Townsend, Bartley, Ajayi, fairly normal, Peltier at right back, Sawyers in front of the back four, Maitland, Niles and Gallagher, then Grant, Snodgrass and Diagne. Yeah, you're probably thinking, where's Pereira? Where was Pereira? On the bench is the answer. On the bench. I mean, you don't know what to say about it, really. Peltier, who's played 3 Premier League games this season, 3 appearances, I should say. One being against Leeds, one being against Man City, and one being against Tottenham. And he also played in the Cup against Blackpool, where I think he really found his level. No disrespect to Peltier, by the way, because he actually wasn't as bad as a lot of people said he would be. I think he outdid himself. The bar was quite low. However, he really did. He didn't play as badly as I thought he was going to. Sawyers did play just as badly as I thought he was going to. I just can't believe he didn't play Pereira. I just can't comprehend that. Your best player, be it was a sort of a bit of a 4-5-1, so Pereira may not fit in, but still, he's your best player. It's the only chance you're going to have of creating something in that final third, and you leave him on the bench. It just proves that Big Sam doesn't really know where he's going with this squad. I mean, you can choose to blame all you like, the defeat, the situation that we're in, but Big Sam has to take a little bit of the blame, if so a bit more than people say. Because that team he put out there today was not good enough. It was not good enough whatsoever. It was just not anywhere near what you'd expect to put out against the side of Tottenham's quality. And we were completely beaten by it. Absolutely beaten by them. 2-0. I mean, they had Kane back, fair enough, that's quite a big boost for them, and it means that they can probably get back to some decent form. But before that, they'd lost 3 on the bounce. That's actually worse form than us in the last 3 games. At least we managed a point against Fulham. But yeah, so you thought maybe you have a little bit of a go at them, perhaps. First half, we were quite good. in terms of defensive organisation. They got in a couple of times, but luckily they didn't manage to carve anything out of that. But in terms of how we played in that first half, we were defensively resolute. We showed a lot of passion, I'd say, to try and keep the ball out of our net. We tried to make things difficult for the team. We tried to cause them problems by, ruffling them up a bit, trying to, look defensively solid. Spurs like to play on the counter attack, so as soon as we were to start counter attacking them, that's when things would probably leave some issues. But first off, we worked hard. We let them have a couple of chances, which was the big ones really being the Kane opportunity. Not good enough to really trouble the Spurs goal. It's just that second half where we sort of fell apart. The first goal from Kane. I just don't know what any of the defenders thought they were doing. Sawyers, why is he even in the team? I don't understand. The lads, fair enough, he's had a tough few weeks, and with all the racism the racial abuse that he's been getting, but which is completely out of order. But the guy just isn't good enough at Premier League level. He's just not good enough. He's a fellow West Brom fan. That's fantastic. Well done for getting to the Premier League with your hometown team. But the fact that he's just average every game, doesn't try, doesn't put in any effort. It might sound like I'm scapegoating him. I'm not. I'm not blaming him for the loss. I'm blaming him for the first goal because he came as if he just stood behind him. Sawyers had him in front of him at one point, and then went and stood in front of Kane and just watched them slide the ball down the side of the defence. But you talk about Sawyers, and I think tidy player, keeps the ball reasonably well, passes reasonably accurately. But the fact that people are still saying that he's quite a good player because his pass accuracy is quite good. You need more than pass accuracy to survive in the Premier League. And quite frankly, he doesn't provide anything else. No tackling, no running back, no chasing back. You saw the counter attack that led to Son's goal, where the ball sort of bobbled past Sawyers and he just jogs after it. I don't know whether that's as fast as he can go, because I very much doubt it. I'm sure he's quite a quick lad. He's quite small and lean, so I'm sure he's probably quicker than that. But the fact that he's just jogging back, playing for his hometown team, most of us would die to be in his position, playing for West Bromwich Albion. None of us would be any good, but I'm sure that most of you would put in 110% for your team, even if you got Megs, you got passed out the game. I'm sure a lot of us would just put in 100% effort, and for a boyhood team that Sawyers is playing in, I just can't believe that he's got this opportunity handed to him on a plate. He's worked hard in the Championship, played decently in the Championship, big part of the promotion team, playing lots of games for us, and came up with us, and he's not put any effort in from what I can see. He's not tried particularly hard. I don't want to seem like I'm scapegoating him, but I feel like I sort of am, because that's your hometown, that's your model player almost. He's West Brom born and bred, and he's played for us, and he got taken out of the team in his first spell at the club, and he's worked hard to get his way back up. But as soon as he's there again, he's back at West Brom level. He's tumbling down again, and it's annoying, because you want to see a hometown lad do well. There's nothing you or I would want better than to see Sawyers do really, really well. It's the same with Sam Field. He's gone on loan to QPR, but he's the person that we want to see do really well. He's the sort of person that we want to see perform. He's the sort of person that we want to see put in the best performance he can and be a pivotal part in the team. But he's not. He's not trying, Sawyers, I'm afraid. It does ask you the question why he started today, because I can't believe it. Other points from the game was that Diagne was born offside. I think he must have been off. I'm gonna check this actually, because I don't want to be wrong, and I don't want to slander him for no good reason. Let's see how many times he was offside. I don't know if it's going to tell me. 4 offsides for Diagne, 2 of which he scored from, but was offside. I think we've definitely got a goal scorer there in Diagne. We just need to teach him the offside rule first, because he had one chance in the first half which he missed, which wasn't offside, but probably would have been if VAR got involved, because he was slightly off, but they didn't give it at the time. However, the next 2, which he needed, which he actually got in the back of the net, You didn't even need a line to draw a line for that one. You just needed the linesman gave him both times, and he's put the ball in the back of the net. But there's definitely a goal scorer in there. I can see there's a goal scorer in there. Just need to teach him the offside rule, I suppose. Yeah, the defence weren't bad really in terms of organisation in that first half. It's just mental resilience really. A good team, a good mentally resilient team, will concede one goal and they'll automatically tighten up to stop themselves conceding another. Our team concedes one goal and then decides to go and concede another one just for the fun of it. Really, I'm not sure what it is, but they just decide to like conceding those sorts of goals. Really, I mean, it's just baffling. Really. Um, uh, Ainsley Maitland-Niles' debut today, along with Yokuslu. We'll talk about him in a second, but Ainsley Maitland-Niles, a bit anonymous to be honest. Tried quite hard. Had a few good flashes on the ball and off the ball. But yeah, a bit anonymous. I just can't understand why he's wanted to come to us. I suppose he wants playing time, but he's not going to actually be on the ball very much in a Big Sam side, is he? Unless you're playing a team that you're really close to beating, like somebody like Sheffield United or Fulham. But you're not going to play them again this season, are you? But in a game like this, it's just not the sort of game that you want to be making your debut in for Maitland-Niles. However, Yokuslu, perfect game to make your debut, on the bench today, came on, played 12 minutes. Sawyers came off for him. Sawyers in 78 minutes attempted 2 tackles, succeeded with 1. That's 78 minutes, yeah. That's 78 minutes for your holding midfielder, the first person in front of your defence. 78 minutes, 1 tackle succeeded out of 2 attempted. Yokuslu comes on for 12 minutes, 3 tackles attempted, 3 succeeded. That just tells you all you need to know. Yokuslu, from the touches I saw of him, looked really good. I'd love to see him play next week. Clearly provides a bit of a shield in front of the defence. It was just when people like Mora and people like Kane and people like Lamela and Son are milling around in that sort of midfield area, trying to sort of rotate to cause a bit of an issue. Sawyers is just sort of just wandering between them. Yokuslu is forming that barrier in front of the defence. He's standing in front of Kane, he's standing in front of Mora, he's standing in front of Son, he's standing in front of Lamela to stop them from getting the ball. Now, that's sort of the idea of having a holding midfielder. The idea of a holding midfielder isn't just to waltz around in front of them and hope that the ball doesn't get near them. Yokuslu stood in front, he created a barrier and did well in that position. I think we set up tactically okay. I think the lineup was a disgrace. Dropping Pereira, your best player, one of the most informed players in the Premier League. Nobody in the Premier League, apart from Ilkay Gundogan, has scored more goals since in the new year than Pereira in the Premier League. We set up tactically okay, I think, in terms of shape and in terms of our game plan. First half, just holding them and then perhaps trying to counter in the second half. They're a good team, Spurs, but those mistakes can be prevented really at the back. It's just same old story. Big Sam, I'm going to read you a stat out now, which I read on Twitter earlier. West Brom have now conceded 28 goals in 10 games under Sam Allardyce, the joint most a team has conceded after a manager's first 10, alongside Danny Wilson at Barnsley in 1997, Nigel Adkins at Southampton in 2012, and Slavica Jokanovic of Fulham in 2018. So that's Big Sam, defensive mastermind, Big Sam, defensive coach. I don't think they've bought into him, the players, at all. I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of both in terms of players being to blame and Allardyce being for blame. I think it's a little bit of both. However, you just need to work a bit harder, the players. I think they tried quite hard today, but still just not good enough. I think they just needed to defend a bit better. They needed to be a bit more resolute. Need to be a bit tougher, I think, in games like this, where you've got a team of footballers you're playing against Tottenham. You've got teams of footballers, good technical ability, not particularly tough, many of them. I'd say people like Højbjerg is tough, and people like the lad, who is he in front of I can't remember, Højbjerg and Ndombele, quite tough, but they're footballers. If you get in their faces and you rough them up a bit, then they're not going to want it as much as you. But I think we just let teams come over wherever you play. If it's at home, away, you just let teams Hey, come on, have a go at us. Yeah, we'll just lie down. I'd love to play against West Brom at the moment. We're so fragile mentally and so fragile. I mean, it's hard being at the bottom of the table, but I don't think our players are up for it. I don't think. I think Big Sam's probably up for it, but the players aren't working with him. I don't think Big Sam's the right man to take us forward at all. But I'm sure he has tried to implement systems that the players just aren't really working with him for. But yeah, a hard defeat to take. Terrible performance, really. Just not one that you'd want to watch. Bit boring. Nothing really going for you forward apart from the goals that Diagne decided to put in the back of the net whilst he was in an offside position. Yes, from one game swiftly on to another. We're going to Manchester United at home next week on Sunday at 2 o'clock. Looking forward to that one, I am. Can't wait, as I'm sure you guys are as well. Sure you guys are looking forward to just can't wait to get into the game. I mean, it's just going to be another loss, isn't it? I can't really describe any other way for it. It's difficult game, good team. Man United got something to play for, whereas we probably haven't. It's definitely a loss. I can't tell you any other way forward. There's no way I can sugarcoat it for you. But there's another loss on the way, similar probably to Spurs. Defense holding out for quite a large period of the game, and then trying to see what you can nick at the other end. But I can't see us nicking anything because we are absolutely terrible. I can't find any other way to describe it. I want to talk positively about my club. I want to, be talking about the club in the best way that I can, but I can't. I just can't find anything nice to say about the players, the coaches, the manager, the team, the board. I can't find anything else nice to say about them, really. The only thing I can say that was nice about them today is that they didn't lose 5-0. They didn't completely give the game away. However, could have done more in that game today, and you probably will do the same next week against Manchester United. I think a lot of West Brom fans have completely lost hope now. I think if you won against Tottenham, it could spur you into something different. But yeah, I can't see us winning any games to come at all, I'm afraid. We're a very fragile side, and I can see Big Sam potentially getting the sack. I think he might be waiting for that. Doesn't have to lose his 100% survival rate. Can go and pick another job somewhere else if he fancies it. Maybe go and retire, do whatever he wants. He won't be bothered. It's just another potential payday for him. Probably doesn't need the money, to be honest. He's probably got enough. But yeah, it's just a bit of a problem, really. Sam Allardyce probably had enough of the club. Probably seen all he needs to see that he can't keep us up. Doesn't want to resign because it makes him look a bit cowardly. That makes him look a bit difficult. A bit like he hasn't been able to do that. Maybe it's a bit stubbornness. Maybe it's a bit of an ego. But yeah, Man United, probably another loss incoming. I'm going to predict a 3-0 win to Manchester United. It's just the way it is, I'm afraid. Just the way it is. I like to be positive. I want to be positive about my team. I want to share positivity with you guys. I want to share some positive thoughts about the club. But there aren't none at the moment. This club is a disgrace. The players on the pitch aren't good enough. The managing staff and the coaching staff aren't doing enough to make them good enough, really. Turn them into a team that can fight. Then they've got no bottle. I think Bilic has to take a bit of the blame for being too loyal with players, being too loyal with people like Dean Garner. That's 18 million absolutely down the pan for one goal in the Premier League. Kyle Grant, 1 goal in the Premier League for probably 16 million at the end of that. So that's, over 30 million wasted on them pair. 30 million with the deals that Sam has bought in could go a long, long way. But yeah, I can only see a loss coming against Manchester United, unfortunately. Want to be positive, want to cause an upset. Want to see a result more like this half and half scarf up there. I'm not a fan of half and half scarves, by the way. But a 5-5 draw would do me just nicely. Just something to cheer about, really. Something to give us a bit of hope. But unfortunately, there is none at the moment. I can't help but thinking, however, that if we had fans in the stadium, we wouldn't be rolling over like we do in some of these games, like 5-0 against Leeds, 4-0 against Arsenal. There would be none of that. There would be none of it. I want to get back in the ground so we can actually show these players, these managers, proper feeling. Because I feel if the players play badly, they've got to deal with Big Sam and they've got to deal with a few coaches to tell them off and give them a bit of a right good telling off. If they play badly whilst this is at the moment. So if they play badly whilst at the moment with no fans, no players, no fans inside the grounds, whatever like that. At the moment, all they've got to deal with if they play badly is Big Sam. That's all they've got to deal with. However, if they play badly when we're in, what happens? They can't escape. They've got plenty of fans on the back, 28,000 fans, shouting at them, telling them exactly what they think. I think it's an easy cop out for players at the moment because there are no fans in the ground. And I hope we're back before the end of the season to show the club our real feelings and our thoughts. But yeah, another loss I can see coming against Manchester United. However, it's now time to a guest. It's time for a guest, anyway. We're going to be talking to... Earlier this week, I caught up with Nick Miller from The Athletic, who has sort of been the brains behind The Athletic's new Beyond the Headline podcast series about the making of Big Sam Allardyce. He's conducted most of the interviews. He's talked about... He's spoken to people who worked around Sam Allardyce, worked with him, worked under him, and he's found out a good sense of what Allardyce is actually like. So I've asked him a few questions, and here's my interview with him. But thank you very much for coming on, Nick. It was a pleasure having you. But here we go. Here is my interview with Nick Miller from The Athletic. On this week's episode of the Baggies Podcast, we welcome Nick Miller, who's the brain behind The Athletic's new Beyond the Headline podcast, which is all about Sam Allardyce. Hello, Nick. How are you?
I'm all right. I've always wanted to be described as the brains behind something, so thank you very much.
So you obviously, what role did you play in this podcast that has been released by The Athletic only today?
So I basically did the majority of the interviews and wrote the script, which was then sort of put together by our producer, Abby Patterson, who made it all sound very nice and very lovely. And the narration was done by James McNicholas, one of our journalists over at Athletic. I was just sort of in the background, really putting the whole thing together.
So you obviously spoke to a lot of people who have been involved with Allardyce. You spoke to obviously a former player, and you spoke to plenty of people who have surrounded Allardyce in his time in management. How did Allardyce's first few managerial jobs shape his style? So obviously he started out at Limerick and obviously went on to roles at Preston, Blackpool, Notts County. How do you think those first few managerial jobs sort of shaped his style and his ethos?
I think the shaping of his style kind of began even before he was a manager. He, as most people probably know, he spent a bit of time, a relatively short period of time, as a player in America in the early 80s, 83, I think it was. And when he was there, he lived in the same kind of apartment block as a load of players for the local NFL team. It was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think. And he was kind of very struck about how well prepared they were, about the various different sorts of coaches they had, the kind of nutrition, the even sports psychology. That obviously him playing in kind of early 80s football in England was not, didn't have that, shall we say. So I think from that point he has spoken before about how aiming to do that kind of shaped his early managerial roles, and the eventually the manager that he would go on to become at kind of Bolton and further on. In terms of what happened in his first few jobs at Limerick and Blackpool and he kind of a brief spell at Preston and then Notts County. It was very much a kind of an openness to trying things. I spoke to quite a few people who would say that if something was suggested to him, be that to do with sports science or psychology or nutrition or something like that, he was very kind of willing to take it on, which I think sort of goes against, which we all know about. But I was just interested in the kind of the difference between that very kind of open-minded, progressive manager and the sort of the persona of Big Sam that has kind of grown over the years.
And you mentioned Bolton there, and that was his longest reign as a manager. That was about 8 years that he stayed at Bolton. He's normally known for firefighting. He's normally known for coming in at those clubs who are struggling and need somebody to get them out of a bit of a mess. And he doesn't stay particularly at those clubs long. What do you think was different or special almost about that Bolton job, which made him stay for such a long period of time?
Well, it's something we say in the podcast, and I think it was a point that Oliver Kay, one of the senior writer for The Athletic, made, was that he's known as this kind of firefighting, um, Winston Wolfe style manager who you bring in when everything's a mess and he clears it up. Well, he's known as that now, but in the first half of his career, certainly at Bolton and Notts County before that, he wasn't really that type of manager at all. He kind of built clubs up from kind of fairly low, a low base. So Notts County, I think they just escaped relegation into the fourth division when he got there, and within about 18 months he'd won he'd won promotion with them by fairly handy margin. Sort of similar position on a higher level at Bolton. I think that they weren't so much fighting against relegation, but they were expected to get promoted, and they were kind of on a bit of a downswing. And he came in and then really built them up. So I think it's kind of more or less from Blackburn, which is where he arrived in about 2008, I think. That's when he started to become a kind of firefighter. The job that he has obviously been brought in to do at West Brom. So in terms of why he stayed so long at Bolton, it's basically because he was a very different sort of manager then.
And you mentioned Blackburn being his first firefighting job. You discussed a bit in the podcast towards the end in that third part about how he doesn't tend to get those bigger jobs and how he doesn't tend to go and already be in one of those big clubs and find a way to take them right to the top. Why do you think he hasn't been given one of those so-called big jobs and only gets those firefighting jobs?
Well, he would say, and not unreasonably, I think, that it's kind of partly due to his persona of the sort of no nonsense proper football man, which it probably has some element to it. But I mean, the Newcastle and England and kind of Everton experiences I think will factor into the thinking of a lot of bigger clubs that he hasn't succeeded for various reasons, some his fault, some not, at those clubs, or sort of more to the point, particularly with Everton, he's done a job that was asked him that was kind of asked of him that wasn't sort of acceptable to the fans of those particular clubs. But yeah, I think the point that we make in the podcast, I think this is a point that George Culkin made, is that you have to really buy into Sam Allardyce. He doesn't buy into the club. You have to be kind of you have to be the guy, the club that really needs him. And they're the places that he's succeeded, and the places where he kind of almost needs the club to, I don't know, enhance his reputation or succeed. They're the places that he hasn't done quite so well. So and obviously at a bigger club, then unless you are a kind of enormous personality manager who has won leagues everywhere, then that's not going to happen. You're always going to be kind of subservient to the needs or the ethos or whatever of the club rather than the other way around.
You mentioned those two jobs, which was my follow-on question from that about Newcastle and Everton. So teams that are used to seeing, you mentioned in the podcast with Kevin Keegan at Newcastle and how he played that sort of nicer brand of football. And obviously Everton were trying to push towards those European heights before Allardyce came and trying to play a bit nicer brand of football. So those teams that are used to seeing that nicer style of football before Allardyce, they don't seem to enjoy having him as much. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, it's the Newcastle thing was slightly odd because he was appointed as manager. I think only a couple of weeks before Mike Ashley came in. He wasn't Mike Ashley's choice, so the football wasn't particularly good. But that the kind of main reason, he was sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time in terms of how that job didn't go very well. I think sort of debate for a long time about whether he is a long ball manager or particularly defensive manager or whatever. But he's a very kind of pragmatic manager, and he kind of does what needs to be done. And a lot of the time, it is playing kind of fairly basic football, and that worked at Everton in as much as it saved them from a relegation that was kind of, maybe not definitely going to happen, but it was they were certainly in danger of going down in the season that he was there, and that will kind of satisfy fans to a sort of kind of base level. There was a game that was cited in the podcast against Arsenal with Everton where West Brom were they set up to get a kind of grim 0-0 draw, and were sort of 4-0 down after about half an hour. Yeah. And that's the sort of it's not necessarily the kind of long ball, but it's the negativity of some of the football at some of the places that he's managed that has got to fans, rather than necessarily the kind of hoofing it up the field and aiming for a big target man kind of football.
And moving more towards West Brom and his appointment at West Brom, yeah, you mentioned about in the podcast how he'd spent so much time away from the game. It was one of his longest periods outside of football, and obviously being stuck at home would probably leave him twiddling his thumbs and wanting to get back into management. Did he realise sort of the size of the job at West Brom? Because it's we're in quite a bit of trouble, I think it's fair to say. And did he realise the size of the job at West Brom when he decided to take it on?
I think he probably did. I mean, he's whatever anyone's opinions of Allardyce might be, he's not an idiot. He obviously he knows that it was an incredibly tough task, but he will have sort of taken from his past that he has been able to sort of take on these jobs and salvage them. I mean, Sunderland and possibly to a slightly lesser extent Crystal Palace were looked like real lost causes when he took them over. He had a little bit more time at both those clubs, I think, but both of them they looked like they were almost certain for relegation, and he saved them. So he will presumably have kind of thought, well, I've done this before. It's a grim situation. The players maybe aren't good enough, but if we can get a few in couple in January and get everyone playing as I need them to play, I've proved that I've done this before and I can do it again.
And obviously it's deadline day today when we speak here in England. Obviously we West Brom looking at getting a few new names through the door. What hand do you think Big Sam will have in the dealings that go on in sort of that deadline day and that transfer window?
It's an interesting one. I mean, the structure at West Brom, I think, is and you'll know this better than me, but the structure is sort of designed a little bit more to keep them, not necessarily keep the manager out of it, but make sure that the manager doesn't quite have the sort of final say or the only kind of say about everything. But I think I as keen as he would have been to kind of get back into the game, I don't really think Allardyce would have taken a job like this if he wasn't promised to have a kind of a fairly significant say. And the one of his first signing being Robert Snodgrass just kind of feels like I was astonished to find out that Robert Snodgrass hadn't played for Sam Allardyce before. It just sort of makes sense. So those kind of signings do sort of suggest that he has kind of had quite a big say. I'm sure in an ideal world he would have wanted to bring in even more than he has done. Well, how many is it now that have come in? Is it 2 or 3 so far?
3 so far. We got Diagne, we got Andy Lonergan, which was a free transfer, yes, course, and Snodgrass as well.
Yeah. So yeah, that's at the time we talk with I don't know, what have we got, about 7 hours to go of the window. I'm sure that he'll be wanting to get more in. But yeah, I really doubt that he would have taken the job on if he wasn't sort of promised a relatively significant say in who comes in.
And obviously, due to last night's result between Brighton and Tottenham, that leaves us a bit more in the peril than we already actually were. Now 9 points from safety, and obviously with that terrible goal difference that we've got, we need to get winning games as soon as possible to sort of retrieve that deficit if we can at all. Will that change his philosophy and perhaps his footballing style in a way? This desperation to get results now.
I don't think so. I think he'll go about it in the same way that he always has done. If if the West Brom fans out there need any kind of reassurance, there have been particularly at Sunderland and Crystal Palace. It did start quite slowly at both of those clubs. Sunderland in particular. It was a kind of really brilliant run of results kind of after around February, March time that kept them in the division. So it does take a little bit of time. I think he would have been concerned about how many goals West Brom are shipping at the moment when, previously, obviously that's been a key thing of his managerial style to very quickly tighten up the defence and make sure goals don't go in at one end and, try and nick one or two at the other end. I think we all thought after the Liverpool game, well, okay, this is Allardyce's methods coming through, and he's already having a big effect, and he's tightening up the defence. So that will be a concern, that the number of goals. And his post-match interview at the weekend, he was obviously quite exasperated about the kind of the mistakes and how it sounded like he was saying that the players weren't really quite listening to what he was saying, which is a bit of a concern. But yeah, like I said, he has started quite slowly at previous clubs, so there is a bit of hope there. The obvious problem being that as you said, there is this big gap, and the games are ticking on now, and there isn't a huge amount of time.
And you mentioned about him coming in and knowing, he's knowing about the size of the job on hand. When Bilic was sacked, I think a lot of, particularly in that game before Bilic was sacked, it was the Man City game, which we managed to get a 1-1 draw against them, and that was obviously a pretty big achievement considering the performances we'd seen before with Bilic. Do you think perhaps the players haven't taken to Allardyce as they have at other clubs?
I really don't. I mean, I really don't. It's probably this is a very boring answer, but it's probably quite unfair of me to speculate. He certainly did seem quite exasperated at the weekend. That it was like he was ticking off with a sort of unruly class of school children who just wouldn't listen to him. But I really couldn't tell you whether the players are kind of taking his instructions on board or not. I would be surprised if they weren't, because again, whatever you may think of his style or personality or whatever, then this is a manager who has succeeded in this very situation before. So if I was a player who wanted to retain Premier League status, then you'd listen to him. But yeah, like I said, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know whether they're following his instructions or taking to his style as much as people have at other clubs, but I'd like to think that they would, if they've got any sense.
And you mentioned that point about in the podcast about his reputation. It's built on that reputation at the moment with coming in and firefighting clubs. I've never been relegated in the Premier League division. Is there going to become a point perhaps with West Brom if things carry on the way they are without getting those wins? Do you think there's going to be a point where he sees this as unsavable and that he might potentially walk from his job at West Brom?
I doubt he'll walk before the end of the season. But equally, I can't really see him sticking around if West Brom do get relegated and sticking around for the Championship. I was sort of mildly surprised that he took the job in the first place. Not just because it was not just because it's a kind of very tough ask and there's a danger of relegation, but I don't know. He's 66 now. He hasn't got a lot to prove. I would assume he doesn't kind of need the money, and this, I suppose he could have seen this as a bit of a sort of free hit where, if West Brom went down, then everyone would say, well, they were terrible anyway, so they were going down, so it's not really your fault. And if he keeps you up, then he's a miracle worker. So I suppose to a point there, he couldn't lose. I don't know. Again, I don't think he'll walk before the end of the season. Everyone has their breaking point. So if West Brom lose the next 10 games, then who knows? He might just kind of throw his papers in the air and walk out exasperated. But as I said, I can't see him walking before the end of the season. But equally, I can't see him staying on beyond the end of the season if West Brom do go down.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us today, Nick, about Allardyce. And obviously, you can catch a bit more detail about Allardyce. It's a 3-part series on The Athletic, isn't it? Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, it's a 3-part podcast series. The series is called Beyond the Headline, and this it's part of a kind of wider series where we've done podcasts about Pep Guardiola and Neymar and a few other people in the past. There's one about Newcastle, which kind of did touch on Allardyce's tenure there as well. It's Beyond the Headline, the making of Big Sam, available wherever you get your podcasts, and also on The Athletic, ad-free. So it's the podcasts they're about sort of half an hour long each, and go and have a listen.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for coming on. As you heard there from Nick, thank you very much for coming on, by the way. But if you want to go and check out their new Beyond the Headline series, there'll be a link in the description for you to listen to that. Obviously, very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed my listen to it. Got me a bit of a sense of what Big Sam's like and just why he's having the problems that he is at West Brom. But yes, you'll find that out in the podcast link in the description. But now it's time for your thoughts towards the end of the episode now. Let's hear what you guys think. About the performances, the team, the players, the manager, whoever you want to blame. It's now time to get your thoughts. So I did a couple of polls. I thought I'll ask a couple of polls, see what you guys think. Allardyce in or out? 16% in, 84% Sam Allardyce out. So it's clear you've given your thoughts there. You've overwhelmingly said it's Allardyce out. Who's to blame for our situation, I've asked as well. Big Sam, Slaven Bilic, the board/owner, players. 73% are the board/owner. So you've given your thoughts there. You clearly think that Big Sam needs to go and the board/owner is to blame for the current disgrace of our club. But yes, that brings us to the end of the Baggies podcast. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as you can. Hopefully you've enjoyed hearing from Nick Miller, I'm going to call him our Sam Allardyce guru. That's what I'm going to call him today, because he's provided really good insight. And obviously you've heard there, Sam Allardyce in or out, and he thinks that he won't resign. He thinks he'll stay with us until the end of the season. So we'll have to see whether that happens. But that brings us to the end of the Baggies podcast episode. If you want to go and listen to the previous episode with Marc-Antoine Fortuno, you can find that in the link in the description, wherever you're listening to. You can find that. If you want to go and listen to the new Beyond the Headline series for The Athletic, you can go and listen to that as well. Hopefully you enjoyed that, because I enjoyed my listen, even though I'm not a fan of Sam Allardyce. It was good to hear a bit of an insight into what sort of a person he is. But that brings us to the end of the episode. Make sure you're following me on Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. Drop a like if you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, Baggies fans. Have a good week. The Baggies Podcast, giving you the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify.